Hey, what's up, Liron here. I've been asked a lot lately about creating depth in watercolor, and it seems to be an issue that many people struggle with. So in this video, I compiled 3 exercises that I believe can help you improve that skill. These won't get you to the point where you can paint with depth consistently all the time, but it's just 3 exercises that work on 3 very important skills that will perhaps help you in the long run to create more depth in your paintings. I hope you're going to find this one useful, and let's get to it. So let us look at the first exercise, 1 out of 3, and that is value gradation and negative shape. So first part is value gradation, which is basically creating an even wash that transitions from light to dark. Now the reason for this is pretty obvious. It's simply because things tend to go from light when they're farther away from us and then turn to dark the closer they are. Now this is a general pattern. Very often the things you see won't follow it perfectly at all, but there is an underlying, maybe it's an underpainting, or maybe it's a very thin initial wash that does follow this kind of a pattern. So even though you will later probably have to start adding and layering more details, and it will depend, of course, on the subject matter, even though you will have to do all of that, underneath it all, very often, a lot of my paintings are characterized by this kind of a thing. And then later you can make it more complex, but for now I want you to keep it simple. So you go from light to dark. And the way you do this, look very carefully in just a few moments at what I'm doing with the palette. I'm reaching to darker and darker values, but I'm doing it gradually. And you want to learn how to transition from the lightest light to the darkest dark, from the pretty light to pretty dark. You want to play around with the range. Now, on top of this, I added the element of negative shapes, which is basically leaving some highlights, painting around them. The reason I do this is because I do want you to not just paint the wash mindlessly, but rather try and also think of it as a painting subject. And the best way to do that is to kind of plot down a few of these highlights and keep them like this. Now, in addition to that, it's just something that happens all the time. It is very common to have these highlights. So I wanted to get you to practice doing those as well. This pattern of going from light to dark and skipping highlights is something that, again, if you watch my videos, I do this in at least 60% of the paintings, especially when it's a landscape or a cityscape and not a still life or a portrait, something that's a wider range or a larger scale. Usually you will encounter this pattern. Now, while you're at it, you may find that maybe you didn't push things dark enough. Maybe you need to go back and redo them. So here I am doing that, coming back with some darker neutral tint and injecting it in some areas where I feel like I didn't go dark enough. And you can continue doing that as long as it's still wet enough, and you can see that the paint is still quite wet here. So this is the first out of the 3 exercises, very useful. Again, these won't get you to paint depth immediately, but it's a step in the right direction, and then you can go on your own journey of discovery and find out what works for you. So this is the first one. Next one is cool to warm. That's 2 out of 3. Exercise 2 out of 3. Cool to warm and negative shapes. So we're doing the exact same thing with painting around shapes or leaving them as highlights, but this time we're working solely on a cool to warm basis. Why? Because another component of creating depth is temperature. And I do have a few important pointers here and things to note. First note, because we're not doing values here, we're using the same value, all of this wash is very watery and pale. And that's great for us. Why? Because it means more flow, it means less struggling with thicker paint, and it's one less thing to think about, right? Now, here's an important key in my opinion, and sorry for the shaky camera. I want you to try and do this while maintaining some level of muteness. Don't go super pure blue to super pure red to super pure yellow. Actually try and have them a little more subtle. And how do you do that? You use all 3 primary colors with one being dominant. So in the background, in the farther areas, you use the blue as the more dominant color, and then you gradually increase the heat, so to speak, by adding more red and more yellow. And this, again, is a very common pattern, especially for landscapes. Aerial perspective plays a role. Things in the distance are cooler. Now on to the last exercise, 3 out of 3, and that is color matching. And this is something you've already seen, and I'm sharing here a snippet from that video. I have already shared it again. Now here's how this all connects. The color matching exercise will help you to get a better understanding of how to match any color you see. And then, while you're thinking about the context of the painting in a more utility kind of way, meaning you are, and by the way, check out the full video if you want the full breakdown of how to do this. While you're thinking about the utility of, an even wash, skipping the highlights, all of that, I also want you to have in the back of your mind, what's the color I'm looking at? What is it and how can I match it? And colors are very tricky, just like values. And just like temperature, they're very contextual. So a color can seem very warm or very cool depending on the context. The hue can look a little different depending on the context. So you have to train your brain to see these things more accurately. And if you watch the color matching video, you see that sometimes I struggle with it too. It's hard to nail the exact match sometimes, okay? But all of these three together, this is why I recommend them, because you have the light to dark technique covered, then you have awareness for temperatures, and lastly you have awareness to colors. And I will talk a bit about in the intro about how to tie them together and what the meaning of this is, and how to make it work as on a longer term, because it's not as obvious. It won't translate immediately to the ability to do these things. So here are the first two exercises, and for the last one, again, feel free to check out the video on the subject, and now let's wrap it up. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed these three exercises, 1, 2, and then the third one, obviously the one I already shared before. I love the idea, for me personally, of practicing one skill at a time. But then, and this is something I haven't talked about a lot, you do have to at least try and apply the skill in a very controlled manner to a full painting. So what do I mean by that? If you do all of these exercises a lot, yes, automatically it will help you improve, and the next time you paint, you will be a little more aware of it. But for the first few times of incorporating a technique into your paintings, what works really well for me, and I would encourage you to try, is to think very consciously about the skill you're trying to improve at. So for example, for the next painting, after you practice this for a while, you feel a bit comfortable with it, you can try and mentally put a lot of emphasis on getting that gradated transition from light to dark. And you actually think about it, and you actually tell yourself, I'm going to try and nail that aspect of the painting, okay? At least for the first few times of really trying to apply the skill, be very conscious of it, and then you can start to let it go, and it will happen more naturally. But with everything, this can take time. It can be very fast. You can master this in an instant, or it can take some time to get a grasp of. So don't beat yourself too badly. Do the thing, do the exercises, practice, and find your way. The way will open up as long as you follow that desire to improve these skills, okay? So I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget, leave a like, leave a comment below to let me know if this was helpful. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts. And if you still aren't subscribed, be sure to subscribe. You can check out my watercolor course and my drawing course. Links are in the description box below. And I will talk to you again real soon.